It definitely wasn't my intention to talk politics today in the morning, but I think a couple of things which Uday Shankar alluded to do definitely require a response. And let me start by saying that Uday perhaps may have been a little right and maybe a little wrong when he said that an accident brought about the economic liberalization process in 1991. The fact remains that the process of opening up India's economy did not really commence in 1991, it actually commenced in 1985. But what happened between 1989 and 1991 was a series of cataclysmic events which transformed the entire global landscape. You had the collapse of the Soviet Union, the demise of erstwhile East Europe, and then you had extremely eminent strategic thinkers like Francis Fukuyama saying that this is the end of history, and then capitalism triumphed. And it held the field from 1991 till about 2004. And in India also, those were the years when the compact on economic liberalization went across the different governments which came and went one after the other between 1991 and 2004. But then in 2004, when people stepped back, paused, and started to think, they realized that there had been economic growth, there had been close to double-digit growth in certain economies, but in many contexts around the world, the growth, unfortunately, was not accompanied by the kind of social gain and this kind of social inclusion which was required. And that's why in many countries which had rejected all forms of or all pale shades of red also started voting social democratic governments back with a vengeance. And that's why in 2004, certain people felt that India was shining. Unfortunately, it was shimmering, or rather it was simmering. And that's why in the past 9 years, an attempt has been made to include those who unfortunately had been left out of the growth story by possibly putting into place the most ambitious rights-based architecture which any country in the world could have possibly conceived, conceptualized, and implemented, starting with the right to information, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, the compulsory education for children, food security, tribal rights, and then, of course, the latest initiative with land acquisition. All these were an attempt to ensure that the fruits of development actually trickle down to the last man in the last row. And this never came at the cost of growth, because if you look at 2004 to 2012 in a perspective, and I think these are figures which were released by the Reserve Bank of India only last week or possibly earlier this week, we clocked 8.1% in terms of growth. And this was at a point in time when economies around the world, when financial institutions which had histories and legacies going back centuries were tumbling like 9 pins. So therefore, I think before we decide to become the prophets of gloom and doom, there is a need to look at the growth story in a larger perspective and to try and appreciate what has been achieved in the context in which it has been done, which also meant surmounting perhaps the most difficult economic crisis which the world has confronted since 1930, which was the economic meltdown, the ADL-driven crisis of 2008, 2009, and 2010. The second point which my colleague and dear friend Mr. Uday Shankar made was with regard to freedom of speech and expression. The philosophy of the UPA government over the past 8 years is that our relationship with the media has been an essay in persuasion. It has not been an essay in regulation. As someone who was at a certain point in time a witness in my earlier capacity and a participant as a lawyer to try and save a media company which had incurred the wrath of the government and was being driven into the ground, I realized as to how fragile media freedoms are. And that is why we ensured in the past 8 years, and the Honorable Prime Minister and the Chairperson of the United Progressive Alliance share this vision that our entire approach towards the media sector has to be an extremely soft touch approach, and we have walked that talk over the past 9 years, and I think we are possibly reasonably, if not satisfied, but do deserve an E for an effort, for what we've attempted to do. But having said that, my own experience as a lawyer makes me conclude that while the freedom of speech and expression should be unfettered, but the reasonable restrictions which were rightly put in place by the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution is something that we need to very seriously introspect about. In addition to the fact that the restrictions which are imposed under 19.2 operate in a totally different field from 19.1G and the caveats which are imposed on it by 19.6. So these are two entirely separate areas. Of course, the Constitution and the fundamental rights have to be read in conjunction, but I guess when we talk about freedom of speech and expression, we do need to factor these little nuances in. Having said that, last night I was, while I was thinking about this big event which the Confederation of Indian Industry hosts every year, I think you started last year, I was struck by a paragraph which William Shakespeare wrote in his epic, The Julius Caesar. And I think possibly that should really sum up the entire breadth of ambition which this summit seeks to encapsulate. That there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads to fortune. Omitted all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries, and on such a full sea we are now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. And I think the CII, Mr. Banerjee, must be complimented for the sheer optimism, if not the audacity of its vision, that we aspire to be a $100 billion industry in the years to come, and the path that we have chosen is a path of innovation. I think those people who have the ability to be able to think big, those who have the temerity to dream, ultimately are able to walk it and ultimately are able to triumph. And I think over the years we would be able to, working in partnership with the industry, be able to translate this dream into a reality. But before we set out to innovate, we would be very well served to remember the caution which was administered by another great man of his time, the late and former Prime Minister Winston Churchill. And he said, and I quote, "We must beware of needless innovation, especially when it is guided by logic." These words are indeed prophetic and prescient, because the reality is that often the logic of the illogical has been the ruler of the kingdom of sublime. And the sands of time stand mute testimony to the ravages of civilization when thinking men have fallen prey to the seduction of demagoguery. Delusions of grandeur must never be allowed to take the place of the vision of moderation. And I would like to underscore that since this is a gathering of thinking people and we as a country have a national obsession with politics, these words would be taken in the context in which they have been uttered. But coming back to the brick and mortar of reality, I would like to appreciate that despite a relative slowdown in the broader economy, the Indian entertainment and media industry has exhibited rather robust growth in the past year. From 805 billion Indian rupees in 2011, revenues have grown to 965 billion Indian rupees in 2012, representing an year-on-year increase of 20%. And by 2017, if you go by the projections which the report that we just released has to offer, the projected revenues are estimated to reach 2,245 billion Indian rupees at a compounded annual growth rate of 18.4%, which I think is not bad considering that some of the other industries have not been really able to have such a robust level of growth. While the TV and print sectors would dominate the industry with 40 or dominate the industry at the moment with 40 and 22% of contributions to gross revenues, this mix would change by 2017 with 28% of the industry revenues coming from internet access. But here, I think we need to compliment and commend the print industry. At a point in time when iconic institutions around the world, print institutions are shutting shop, the Indian print industry continues to grow at a very robust rate with a compound annual growth rate of about 10%. By 2017, it would be the 6th largest print market in the world. And so therefore, there is a lot of juice in these oranges and apples. And the print industry would be well served during the course of the summit to think or to innovate as to how this 10% CAGR could possibly be even increased further. The irony really is, as both Ronnie and Rahul and even Amit were pointing out, is the broadcasting sector. The broadcasting sector between 1991 and 2013 has grown from one television channel to 798 at the last count. But news broadcasting represents only 7% of the entire television universe. So possibly there is a case for news broadcasters to reimagine their content paradigms, and I do think that they require help with their distribution scheme, and government has been, as the industry is aware, we've been very proactively working to see that the bottlenecks with regard to distribution are streamlined as much as possible in the short term, that since we have implemented or we've started to implement the entire paradigm of digitization. The new frontier, of course, is digital, and I have repeated this ad nauseum, and if some of you have heard it earlier, would you please bear with me. But the internet, which was perhaps the largest experiment in anarchy, has succeeded. It represents the largest ungoverned space in planet Earth. Never before in the history of mankind has so much power been there in the hands of so many people at so many places concurrently. There is a tale of two civilizations which is playing itself out. A physical civilization which has emerged over the millennia, and a virtual civilization which is forming. Since 2003, there is more digital content which has been churned out every 2 days than possibly from the beginning of civilization till 2003, if we take that as the benchmark here. And so therefore, the Indian media and entertainment industry, which of course has been able to leverage this change in the past decade, needs to possibly more robustly be proactive to see as to how the synergies which this is creating between different applications of content dissemination can be leveraged further. We've had over the past 20 years possibly the most exponential growth in mobile telephony in the country. As we speak, there are 86.7 crore mobile phones and possibly the cheapest call rates anywhere in the world. 12.4 crore internet users, which would grow to about 37 crores by 2017. 8 crore people on Facebook, another crore and a half on Twitter, growing exponentially every day. And that is why this is the technology area which is going to be the key enabler, whereby industry, if it maps out the roadmap properly, would be able to leverage it to see that you can do the 20% or 25% growth which you are contemplating to really be able to reach the target of $100 billion. Only yesterday in the cabinet, we've given an in-principle nod to incentivize semiconductor wafer fab manufacturing facilities in India. And as this new paradigm rolls out, whereby India would possibly become the manufacturing hub for hardware also, this is an opportunity which vendors in this particular space can also leverage. And therefore, what we've been witnessing till now is that while we've been a market leader insofar as content and services are concerned, in the hardware area, we've been lagging a little behind, and that's why government has walked the extra mile. We've taken a decision in principle that we will incentivize hardware creation, which ultimately will feed into software and content and would bring about a synergy. Similarly, radio, which was considered to be a casualty of the tectonic shifts in the technological era, has rebounded back because of mobile telephony. And as we speak, we are poised on the cusp of commencing the auction for phase 3 FM radio. We are trying to put in processes which can make the whole ascending e-auction process as transparent and as hassle-free as possible. And I think by the next month, we would be in a place, we would be in a position to be able to unroll this entire phase 3 auction process. Similarly, in the film sector, which both Ronnie and Uday and Amit alluded to, as we speak, the Justice Mudgal Committee is winding down its remit to overhaul the archaic Cinematographic Act of 1952. We have given them a very, very wide remit. We've given them an open license and the latitude to be able to overhaul the entire legislative architecture in order to bring it up to speed with what the current reality is. And I do hope that when they come back with those recommendations, because there's been a series of consultations across the country, which I do hope the industry has taken advantage of, but when they come back with their recommendations, which they've told us by mid-October, we would try and put this legislative architecture in place. So therefore, some of the concerns which you have, which really have a bearing on the entire federal scheme, center versus state, the CBFC's remit, where the state government's remit on law and order, we would be able to find a method of ironing them out. But the one contradiction which Mr. Amit Khanna alluded to, and I think that is where a lot of work needs to be done, and Mr. Mahesh Bhatt also drew my attention to that, is the lack of television, enough cinema screens in India. While you have, or you may have 14 million Indians who go to cinema every day, this number could easily be 30 million, 40 million, 100 million, provided that we have those many schemes in place. And on this particular aspect, we would welcome any inputs which the industry may have as to how government can work with not only industry on one hand, but with state governments on the other, to see that we can put in place a proper package of incentives which can lead to the creation of infrastructure, which then the soft power or the content industry would be able to leverage to possibly attain its growth objectives. I would just like to conclude on a very personal note. When I took over as the minister last year, it was on the cusp of the CII's Big Picture Summit. For 5 years as the spokesperson of the Indian National Congress, I had interacted with the front end of the media, and over the last 10 months, I've been trying to understand the nuances of the back end of your business. I must confess, it's been a very steep learning curve, but all of you have been extremely patient teachers, and I would like to thank all of you for your patience. And I would just like to leave you with one thought, that government, and especially the government of the United Progressive Alliance, believes that the media and entertainment industry, both in its content and non-content dimensions, is something which can unlock the creative potential of millions and millions of young people across the length and breadth of this country. And we would partner with the industry, we would walk that extra mile to ensure that we put in place the requisite infrastructure, the requisite policy landscape to see that you are able to translate your $100 billion vision into reality.